The dim light of dawn cast a fragile glow over the small village of Everwood, nestled in a valley surrounded by ancient hills. The villagers stirred slowly to life, their routines as predictable as the chirping of birds at sunrise. It was an unremarkable morning, or so it seemed, until the news spread like wildfire. Old Samuel, a man believed dead and buried for 3 days, had returned. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Samuel had been a beloved figure in Everwood. A carpenter by trade and a storyteller by nature, his tales of long-forgotten times and adventures captivated the young and old alike. Yet his passing had come suddenly, a quiet departure in his sleep. The funeral had been somber but simple, with the entire village gathering to pay their respects. His body had been lowered into the ground, and his absence had left a palpable void. But now, the unimaginable had occurred. Rumors of his return began with a hysterical cry from a shepherd boy who had seen Samuel wandering near the graveyard at dawn. The boy described him as pale and weary, his eyes hollow but burning with an intensity that defied his frail appearance. Samuel carried himself with a strange, deliberate gait, as though moving between worlds. By mid-morning, Samuel stood at the heart of the village, leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. His clothes were the same he had been buried in, though they hung on him loosely, as if he had shrunk in size. The crowd that gathered was hesitant, unsure whether they faced a miracle or a nightmare. Children clung to their mothers, while the village priest clutched his rosary beads, murmuring prayers under his breath. Samuel's voice broke the silence. It was raspy but firm, a voice that seemed to echo with the weight of another realm. "I have returned," he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, "with a message you must heed." The villagers stood spellbound. Samuel began his tale, speaking of his journey after death. "When I closed my eyes that night," he recounted, "I felt a coldness unlike any winter's breath. I was drawn through a tunnel of shadows, and at the end of it, I found myself in a place not of this earth." He described a luminous plain, neither heaven nor hell, where the air shimmered with an eerie glow. The realm was inhabited by figures cloaked in light, their faces obscured yet unmistakably watching him. Their voices were a harmony of whispers and thunder, each word resonating within him. "They spoke of our world," Samuel continued, his voice trembling. "They spoke of the choices we have made, the paths we have taken, and the ruin that awaits us if we do not change." The crowd listened in stunned silence as Samuel painted a vivid picture of the messages he had received. He spoke of humanity's greed, its disregard for the earth, and its abandonment of compassion. The beings of light warned that the balance of existence was tilting precariously, and that the consequences would be dire. But what truly chilled the villagers was Samuel's account of what lay beyond the luminous plain. He described a second journey, this one descending into darkness. "There is a place," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, "where screams echo endlessly, and the air is thick with despair. It is a void of suffering, where time ceases to have meaning." His description of this infernal realm was vivid and horrifying. He spoke of shadowy figures writhing in torment, of rivers of fire that burned without consuming, and of an oppressive presence that seemed to feed on fear. Samuel had not been allowed to linger there, but had been pulled back to the luminous plain, where the beings of light imparted their final warning. "They told me," he said, his eyes locking onto the priest, "that heaven is not guaranteed. It is not a reward, but a choice, a path we must tread with purpose and humility, and they sent me back to tell you this. Time is running out." The priest stepped forward, his face pale. "Why you?" he asked, his voice wavering. "Why were you chosen to deliver this message?" Samuel's expression softened, and for a moment, he seemed more human than harbinger. "I asked the same," he admitted, "and they told me that my heart still carried love and regret, that my soul lingered on the cusp of redemption. They said that my return would serve as proof of their words." The villagers were divided. Some fell to their knees praying fervently, while others whispered among themselves, their skepticism evident. Was Samuel's story a divine revelation, or the delusion of a man who had cheated death? The village elder, a woman named Agnes, stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Samuel," she said, "what must we do? What can we change to avert this doom you speak of?" Samuel took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his message. "Live with kindness," he replied. Turn away from selfishness and greed. Cherish the earth, for it is a gift we have abused. And above all, find faith, not in rituals or idols, but in the goodness within and the power to choose right over wrong. His words sparked a flurry of action in the days that followed. The villagers, inspired or terrified by Samuel's tale, began to re-evaluate their lives. They mended broken relationships, shared their resources more freely, and took greater care of their environment. Yet a shadow of doubt lingered. Not all were convinced, and whispers of conspiracy or madness persisted. Samuel himself grew weaker with each passing day. His return from the grave seemed to have drained him, and his once robust frame was now gaunt and fragile. He spent his remaining days in quiet reflection, offering guidance to those who sought it. He spoke often with the priest, who had become his most ardent believer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel gathered the villagers once more. "My time is short," he said, his voice barely audible. "But before I go, I must warn you of one final thing." He described a vision he had experienced since his return, a vision of a great storm sweeping across the world, erasing all in its path. "This storm is not of wind and rain," he explained. "It is a reckoning, a consequence of our choices. If we do not change, it will come." That night, Samuel passed away in his sleep. This time there was no doubt. His body was cold and lifeless, and no miraculous return followed. The villagers buried him once more, but his message lingered in their hearts. Years passed, and the story of old Samuel became legend. The village of Everwood changed in profound ways, becoming a beacon of harmony and sustainability. Travelers who passed through often remarked on the unique spirit of the place, unaware of the extraordinary tale that had shaped it. But the storm Samuel had warned of was not merely metaphorical. Across the world, disasters struck with increasing frequency, floods, fires, and conflicts that seemed to mirror his forewarnings. Those who remembered his tale began to wonder if his message had been meant not just for Everwood, but for all of humanity. The years that followed old Samuel's return were marked by a subtle but pervasive unease that rippled far beyond the boundaries of the village of Everwood. His story, carried by travelers and wanderers, seeped into the consciousness of neighboring towns and cities. It spread like the wind, intangible but undeniable. People spoke of the old man who had defied death and returned with a message from beyond. Some embraced his warnings with reverence, others dismissed them as the ramblings of a desperate soul seeking attention even in the grave. Yet for those who truly listened, Samuel's tale carried a weight that could not be ignored. It was not simply the story of a man brought back from the dead, but of the profound truths he claimed to have uncovered. The luminous plain he described, the shadowed abyss of despair, and the cryptic beings of light, all of these hinted at a reality far greater and more complex than the world humanity thought it knew. In the bustling city of Luthen, scholars debated the veracity of Samuel's claims. Philosophers and theologians argued late into the night, poring over ancient texts and scriptures to find parallels. The concept of liminal realms, celestial beings, and apocalyptic warnings was not new, but the specificity of Samuel's account added an unnerving dimension. "He speaks of heaven as a choice, not a reward," one scholar remarked, tracing his finger over a faded manuscript. This aligns with the teachings of many ancient traditions, yet the urgency of his message sets it apart. Artists, too, found themselves captivated by Samuel's vision. Painters filled their canvases with haunting depictions of the luminous beings and the abyssal void he had described. Poets wrote verses about the frailty of the human spirit and the precarious balance between light and darkness. Musicians composed symphonies that swelled with the eerie beauty of his words, their notes a mournful echo of the storm he had foreseen. In Everwood, life continued to shift. The villagers had adopted Samuel's teachings as a guiding philosophy, but they remained vigilant, fearing that complacency might undo their progress. The children who had been mere toddlers when Samuel returned were now growing into young adults, carrying the legacy of his warning with them. They spoke of him as though he were a prophet, their voices hushed with a mixture of awe and solemnity. Among them was a boy named Elias, who had been no older than 4 when Samuel reappeared. Elias's earliest memory was of standing in the village square, clutching his mother's hand as Samuel spoke of the beings of light. Now a youth of 16, Elias often wandered the hills surrounding Everwood, his thoughts filled with questions that seemed too vast for his young mind. What had Samuel truly seen? Were the luminous beings benevolent or indifferent? And what role, if any, Did humanity play in the grand scheme of existence? One crisp autumn evening, Elias climbed to the top of a hill overlooking the village. The stars glittered above, their cold light casting an otherworldly glow on the landscape. He sat cross-legged on the grass, gazing upward as though searching for answers among the constellations. "Do you think he was telling the truth?" a voice asked behind him. Elias turned to see Mara, a girl a year older than him, her dark hair framing a face that always seemed alight with curiosity. She was holding a lantern, its warm glow a stark contrast to the starlight. "I don't know," Elias admitted, "but I can't stop thinking about it. What if he was right? What if the storm is still coming?" Mara sat beside him, her lantern between them. "My father says Samuel's message was a lesson, not a prediction. He thinks the storm was a metaphor for the chaos we create when we forget what matters." Elias frowned. "But what if it wasn't? What if it's real and we're running out of time?" Mara's gaze shifted to the horizon. "Then we'd better be ready." Their conversation, like so many in Everwood, reflected the lingering uncertainty that Samuel's story had left behind. But while some grappled with the philosophical implications of his return, others sought tangible evidence of the truths he had revealed. In the years following Samuel's second death, a group of seekers emerged, individuals determined to find the luminous plane he had described. They were a disparate group, mystics, scientists, explorers, and even skeptics. What united them was an insatiable curiosity and a willingness to risk everything to uncover what lay beyond the veil of mortality. One such seeker was Dr. Eleanor Hart, a renowned physicist whose work in quantum mechanics had already challenged conventional understandings of reality. She had been drawn to Samuel's story not for its spiritual implications, but for the possibility that it hinted at undiscovered dimensions of existence. "If there is a luminous plane," she wrote in her journal, "it may be a realm that exists parallel to our own, a place where the laws of physics operate in ways we have yet to comprehend." Dr. Hart assembled a team of researchers and embarked on an ambitious project to recreate the conditions Samuel had described. Using advanced technology, they sought to simulate the tunnel of shadows and the threshold between light and darkness. Their experiments, conducted in a remote laboratory, pushed the boundaries of human understanding. But each success was met with new questions, and the luminous plane remained elusive. Meanwhile, mystics and spiritualists approached Samuel's story from a different angle. They delved into ancient practices of meditation, fasting, and ritual, hoping to glimpse the realms he had described. Some claimed to have succeeded, reporting visions of light and shadow that mirrored his descriptions. Their accounts were met with skepticism by the scientific community, but their fervor was undiminished. As the seekers pursued their quests, the world around them began to change in subtle but troubling ways. Natural disasters grew more frequent and intense, as though the earth itself were straining under an invisible weight. Wars and conflicts erupted with alarming regularity, fueled by greed and desperation. The signs Samuel had spoken of, the balance tilting toward ruin, seemed to be manifesting. In Everwood, the villagers could not ignore these signs. They redoubled their efforts to live in harmony with each other and the earth, but their peaceful existence felt increasingly fragile. Elias, now a young man of 20, had taken on a leadership role in the village, guiding his peers with a wisdom beyond his years. He often found himself thinking of Samuel's final warning and the storm that loomed ever closer. One fateful night, a traveler arrived in Everwood, a weathered man with a haunted expression and a satchel filled with maps and notes. He introduced himself as Josiah, a wanderer who had spent decades searching for answers to the mysteries of life and death. "I've followed Samuel's story for years," Josiah told Elias and the village elders. "It's taken me across continents and through trials I never imagined. And now, I believe I've found something." He unrolled a map, its surface marked with strange symbols and annotations. "These are places where the barriers between worlds are thinnest," he explained. "Places where people have reported visions, apparitions, and encounters with the inexplicable." The villagers listened intently as Josiah described his journey. He spoke of ancient ruins, sacred groves, and desolate landscapes where the veil between realms seemed to tremble. "If Samuel's luminous plane exists," he concluded, "these are the places where it might be glimpsed." Elias felt a stirring of hope and dread. Could Josiah's discoveries offer answers to the questions that had plagued Everwood for so long? Or would they lead to revelations too overwhelming to bear? Determined to find the truth, Elias volunteered to accompany Josiah on his quest. Together, they set out into the unknown, their path guided by the cryptic map and an unshakable sense of purpose. Their journey took them through treacherous terrain, towering mountains, dense forests, and arid deserts. At each location, they sought signs of the luminous plane, conducting rituals and experiments to pierce the veil. They encountered others on similar quests, pilgrims, researchers, and wanderers, each driven by their own motivations. In a remote canyon bathed in moonlight, Elias and Josiah experienced a moment that defied explanation. As they stood in silence, a shimmering light enveloped the landscape, and the air grew heavy with an otherworldly presence. Elias felt a surge of emotion, fear, awe, and an overwhelming sense of connection. It was fleeting, but it left an indelible mark on his soul. "I think we're close," Josiah said, his voice trembling. But their journey was far from over. As they pressed on, they faced trials that tested their resolve and their beliefs. They grappled with the limits of human understanding, the fragility of faith, and the enduring mystery of existence. Back in Everwood, the villagers awaited their return with bated breath. Samuel's warnings had taught them to prepare for the worst, but they clung to the hope that Elias and Josiah might bring back answers, or at least a glimmer of understanding. When Elias finally returned, he was a changed man. His eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences beyond words, and his voice carried the weight of profound revelation. He gathered the villagers and shared what he had seen, weaving a tale of light and shadow, of hope and despair. But the most important message he carried was not one of fear or prophecy. It was a reminder of humanity's capacity for choice, for redemption, and for creating a future shaped by compassion and courage. Elias's words resonated deeply with the villagers of Everwood, but his journey was far from over. The luminous plane had not revealed itself in full, nor had the mysteries of Samuel's message been fully unraveled. Elias knew that what he and Josiah had glimpsed was merely the beginning, a fragile doorway into a realm that existed beyond comprehension. Yet, within those fleeting moments of transcendence, Elias had come to understand one undeniable truth: humanity's destiny was not fixed. It was malleable, a path shaped by the choices of individuals and the collective actions of the whole. As Elias tried to settle back into the rhythms of village life, he found himself restless. He would often climb the hills surrounding Everwood at night, staring up at the stars and feeling as though they held secrets he could not yet grasp. The villagers noticed his unease, but none could bring themselves to question him directly. Instead, they gave him space, sensing that whatever was stirring within him needed time to come to the surface. One evening, as Elias stood at the edge of the village square, he was approached by Mara, who had grown into a confident young woman with a keen sense of purpose. She had become a leader in her own right, organizing the community's efforts to sustain the land and maintain harmony among the villagers. "You've been distant," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Whatever you saw out there, it's still with you, isn't it?" Elias nodded, his eyes distant. "I can't shake the feeling that there's more to uncover. Samuel's message wasn't just for us, it was for the world, and I can't ignore the signs, the disasters, the unrest. It's all building towards something." Mara tilted her head, studying him. "Then what do you plan to do?" Elias hesitated, the weight of his thoughts pressing heavily on him. "I need to go further, beyond what Josiah and I explored. There are places we didn't reach, places where the veil might be thinner. If the storm is coming, I have to understand it. I have to find a way to stop it." Mara's expression was unreadable for a moment, and then she smiled faintly. "You always were the stubborn one. If you're going, you won't go alone. The village depends on you, Elias, but we also trust you. Whatever you find out there, it will help us all." Within weeks, Elias had prepared for another journey, this time with a small group of trusted companions, including Mara. They set out with a mix of supplies and tools, both practical equipment and objects of symbolic importance, such as Samuel's walking stick, which had been preserved as a relic since his passing. Elias believed it might hold a connection to the realm Samuel had traversed. Their path took them beyond the familiar landscapes of Everwood and into the untamed wilderness. They ventured into dense forests that whispered with ancient secrets, crossed rivers that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and climbed mountains that scraped the heavens. At each turn, they encountered signs that defied explanation, carvings in stone that matched Samuel's descriptions of the luminous beings, echoes of voices that seemed to come from nowhere, and moments when time itself seemed to falter. One night, as they camped beneath a canopy of stars, Mara spoke of a dream she had experienced. "I was standing in a place of endless light," she said, her voice hushed. "But it wasn't peaceful. It was overwhelming, like the light was alive and watching me. And then I saw shadows moving within it, as if the darkness was part of the light itself." Elias listened intently, recognizing her description as eerily similar to what Samuel had recounted. "Perhaps the light and darkness aren't opposites," he mused. "Maybe they're two sides of the same force, intertwined. If that's true, then the balance Samuel spoke of isn't just about choosing one over the other. It's about understanding how to live with both." The group pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency that none of them could fully articulate. They encountered challenges that tested their resolve: treacherous terrain, harsh weather, and moments of internal conflict. Yet, through it all, they were bound by a shared purpose, a determination to uncover the truth and bring it back to the world. Their journey led them to an ancient monastery perched high in the mountains, a place shrouded in legend and mystery. The monks who dwelled there were said to be guardians of forbidden knowledge, keepers of secrets that predated human memory. The group approached the monastery with a mixture of reverence and trepidation, unsure of what they would find. The monks received them with a calm that was almost unsettling. Clad in simple robes, their faces bore the marks of age and wisdom. The leader of the order, a man known only as Brother Nethan, greeted Elias and his companions with a knowing smile. "You seek the luminous plane," Nethan said, his voice low and measured. "But what you truly seek is not a place. It is a state of being. The realm you speak of exists not outside of you, but within." Elias was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "Samuel spoke of traveling through a tunnel, of encountering beings of light and darkness. Are you saying it wasn't real?" Nethan shook his head. "It was real, but not in the way you understand reality. The luminous plane is a reflection of the soul, a mirror that reveals the truths we hide from ourselves. To reach it, you must first confront your own shadows." The monks guided the group through a series of rituals and meditative practices designed to open their minds and awaken their spirits. Elias struggled with the process, finding himself confronted by memories and fears he had long buried. He saw visions of his childhood, moments of pain and regret, and a deep-seated fear of failure that had driven him for years. Mara, too, faced her own trials. She saw glimpses of a world consumed by chaos, a reflection perhaps of the storm Samuel had foreseen. But within the chaos, she also saw glimmers of hope, moments where humanity's resilience and compassion shone through. As the group delved deeper into their inner journeys, they began to experience strange phenomena. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and the boundaries between their physical surroundings and the realm of their visions began to blur. One evening, as they meditated in a circle beneath the monastery's great oak tree, Elias felt a presence unlike anything he had ever known. It was neither light nor darkness, but a force that encompassed both, a force that seemed to whisper truths in a language he could not comprehend. When he opened his eyes, he found himself standing in a place that defied description. The ground beneath him glowed faintly, and the air shimmered with an iridescent light. Figures moved around him, their forms indistinct but undeniably alive. They radiated a sense of knowing, as though they were both ancient and eternal. "Elias," a voice said, resonating within his mind rather than his ears. "You have come far, but your journey is not complete. The storm Samuel warned of is not a punishment, it is a choice, a reflection of humanity's collective will. If you wish to avert it, you must guide your people toward unity, toward understanding. But know this, the path will not be easy." The vision faded, and Elias found himself back beneath the oak tree, surrounded by his companions. Their faces mirrored his own, awestruck, humbled, and deeply moved. The group left the monastery with a renewed sense of purpose. They returned to Everwood and shared their experiences, sparking a wave of reflection and action within the village. But Elias knew that their work could not end there. The storm Samuel had foreseen was not confined to Everwood. It was a global reckoning, one that required humanity as a whole to awaken to its potential for both destruction and renewal. Elias and Mara began traveling beyond the village, sharing their story with anyone who would listen. They encountered resistance and skepticism, But they also found allies, individuals and communities who were willing to embrace the message of balance and unity. Together, they formed a growing movement, one that sought to bridge divides, heal wounds, and cultivate a sense of shared responsibility for the world. Over time, the movement began to take root, its influence spreading across borders and cultures. It was not without its challenges. Humanity's flaws and fears often threatened to derail progress. But the memory of Samuel's return, the lessons of the luminous plane, and the resilience of those who believed in a better future provided a guiding light. Elias lived to see the dawn of a new era, a time when the balance Samuel had spoken of was no longer a distant ideal, but a living reality. And though the luminous plane remained a mystery, its essence lingered in the hearts of all who had glimpsed its truth. That within the interplay of light and darkness lay the power to shape a future worthy of hope. Elias's twilight years were marked by a quiet resolve, a sense of fulfillment that came not from the completion of a task, but from the unending commitment to its cause. The movement he had helped to nurture now stretched across the world, a tapestry of interconnected communities dedicated to balance, unity, and renewal. Yet even as he witnessed the fruits of their labor, Elias remained humbled by the enormity of what lay ahead. The world was no utopia. Humanity's flaws were not erased, but softened, their edges dulled by the collective realization that survival required cooperation. Greed still existed, as did anger and despair. But so too did hope, compassion, and the determination to rise above adversity. Elias often reflected on the words of Brother Nathan, that the luminous plane was not a destination but a reflection. What humanity had begun to achieve was not perfection, but a willingness to confront and reconcile its own contradictions. One late autumn afternoon, Elias stood on a hill overlooking Everwood, the place where his journey had begun. The landscape before him was alive with change. Terraced gardens carved into the hillsides, wind turbines turning gracefully in the breeze, and children laughing as they ran along the paths. It was a far cry from the village of his youth, yet it retained the same soul, a deep connection to the earth and to each other. Mara joined him, now a woman whose leadership had become a cornerstone of their shared efforts. Her face bore lines of experience and resilience, and her eyes carried the weight of their shared journey. She handed him a steaming cup of tea and stood beside him, both of them silent for a moment as they took in the view. "Do you ever think about what Samuel would say if he could see all this?" she asked. Elias smiled faintly. "I think he'd say there's still work to be done. He never saw balance as an endpoint. It was always a process. But I'd like to think he'd be proud of how far we've come." Mara nodded. "Do you think the storm is over?" Elias's smile faded as he considered her question. "The storm isn't something that ends, Mara. It's part of the human condition. The struggle between creation and destruction, light and darkness. The difference now is that we've learned how to navigate it, to face it together instead of tearing each other apart." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a young boy carrying a letter. The boy, no more than 10 years old, handed it to Elias with a shy smile. "From the council in Luthen," he said before running off. Elias opened the letter, his hand steady despite the chill in the air. It was a request for his presence at an upcoming gathering of leaders from across the region, a summit to discuss the next steps in their ongoing efforts to rebuild and strengthen their world. As he read, Elias felt a familiar stirring within him, the call to continue, to guide and learn, to carry the message forward. Turning to Mara, he said, "It seems the journey isn't over after all." She grinned. "It never is, Elias. It never is." The seasons turned, and the rhythm of life in Everwood continued to evolve, its people deeply rooted in a way of living that honored both the land and the lessons Samuel had left behind. The scars of the past, both individual and collective, were not erased, but they became part of a larger narrative, a story of resilience and transformation that defined the village and its people. Elias found himself more reflective with each passing day. The movements he had helped inspire had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. Everwood, once a quiet and isolated community, had become a symbol of hope and cooperation. Pilgrims, thinkers, and seekers traveled from faraway lands to witness its way of life and hear the stories of Samuel, Elias, and Mara firsthand. The village became a crossroads of cultures and ideas, a place where the boundaries of language and tradition seemed to blur in the shared pursuit of balance. On one particular morning, As the first light of dawn crept across the hills, Elias made his way to the graveyard where Samuel rested. He carried with him a bundle of flowers, simple wild blooms he had gathered himself. Kneeling by the weathered gravestone, he placed the flowers carefully and sat in silence. "Samuel," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's been decades since you returned to us, and still, your words guide me. I've tried to live in the light of your message, to bring others toward it too, but the world is vast, and the challenge is unending. Sometimes I wonder if we're strong enough to see it through." The wind stirred the branches of the nearby trees, and Elias closed his eyes, listening to the rustling leaves. It was as if the earth itself responded, a reminder of the interconnectedness that Samuel had spoken of. Though no voice answered him, Elias felt a profound sense of presence, a reassurance that he was not alone in carrying this burden. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on an old man returning from death with a terrifying message? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.